Hey everyone, my name is Razzie and welcome to a late video of my top 5 games of 2016. These are the games I enjoyed most last year, the ones I extracted the most entertainment from and connected with, and which I personally appreciated above the others that I played. So that doesn't mean one of these games is more objectively better than the other. Also, this list will only include AAA games, because I didn't have the opportunity to indulge in many indie games in 2016, which is something I hope to correct in the future. Alright, let's begin. Doom, single player. Yeah, who didn't see this coming? The reason I love this nearly perfect modern reincarnation and adaptation of Doom so much is because it was exactly what I needed when I bought it. I didn't have to think when I played it. I didn't feel the need to analyze or critique anything about it. I just enjoyed it in the moment, and it was just so genuinely fun. If you don't know, I'm largely interested in storytelling in games, which makes Doom come as such a surprise because it doesn't really have one. And yet, it is still so engaging for me. The game knows exactly what it is and doesn't take itself too seriously. It's simple, or at least that's how it appears on the surface. Doom is so expertly designed. Nearly every mechanic complements the others. The controls, the level design, the weapons, the enemies, the music, all of it fits perfectly together so that everything comes naturally to you in the moment, making gameplay so immediately satisfying. You rely more on your muscle memory as you make tons of split-second decisions in this adrenaline-fueled dance. The main reason this game isn't higher on my list is because I just enjoyed the other games to come more, and I also felt like Doom very rarely became slightly repetitive. If I were to tell you, you'd basically just be killing demons, engaging in some basic platforming, and finding keys to open doors for around 10 hours, you'd expect that to get stale very fast, but it doesn't with Doom, because of how well it is designed. Considering you're basically doing the same thing for the entire game and it only very rarely became repetitive, well, that's something that should be applauded. Uncharted 4, the single player. Uncharted 4 is my favorite Uncharted game. Yep, I like it even more than 2. But that's probably because I didn't have a PS3 around the time when that came out, so I don't have terribly much nostalgia influencing me. Uncharted 4 is a lot more emotional than its predecessors, in my opinion, with excellent characters and character development, a staple of pretty much every Naughty Dog game. The gameplay itself is perhaps some of the most refined I've experienced in a linear third-person shooter, enhanced by insane animation quality, sound effects, and responsiveness that simply astounded me. The general shooter and melee gameplay in Uncharted 4 is so cinematic looking that it almost appears scripted, yet in fact most of it gives the player a surprising amount of control. Yeah, there are a lot of scripted moments in the game, but Naughty Dog knows exactly when to give you control and how much of it to give to you, and the result is some incredibly exhilarating experiences that had me on the edge of my seat. But Uncharted 4 also knows when to tone it down, to give you some breathing room. It lets you explore in your own time more often than in previous Uncharted games, with larger environments that allow for multiple approaches to levels. Oh, and did I mention the game is beautiful? Well yeah, this is still the best looking game I've seen to date. I cannot stress the amount of production value this game has. It truly is a testament to what the PlayStation 4 can do. I honestly expected Uncharted 4 to be higher on this list. The reason it isn't is because I don't think it innovates enough on its predecessors, so some things in it can be fairly predictable. At this point, there's only so many times that something can collapse under Nate before it gets stale. It's also just a bit too long for my liking, and the story can begin to drag towards the end. In general, the story pacing isn't always the best, and I was especially annoyed with how much time I spent in the jungle section. The characters carry the narrative for the most part. The treasure hunting plot itself isn't terribly interesting. Nevertheless, Uncharted 4 is damn well near third-person blockbuster perfection in my opinion. It does stay safe with its storytelling for the most part, with cinematics responsible for telling the bulk of its narrative, but it transitions so seamlessly to gameplay that I think I can forgive it. But that's how Naughty Dog tells its stories, and that is what you should expect from them, and they're one of the best when it comes to this format. Dishonored 2. In my review for Dishonored 2, I said it was my game of the year. So far. As I've said before, Dishonored 2 is nearly everything I wanted out of a sequel. I wanted it to build on the excellent gameplay of the original with more creative powers, weapons, abilities, and definitely its level design. And Dishonored 2 does just that. There are so many ways of playing this game, giving it an insane amount of replay value, and allowing it to tell small, hilarious stories unique to each player using just its systems. The overarching story is compelling enough and the characters are interesting, but I think the main appeal of Dishonored for me is its world, its aesthetic and atmosphere, and obviously its gameplay. After much thought and careful consideration, Dishonored 2 isn't my game of the year because the next two games simply surprised me more. They provided me with an experience I wasn't expecting. I don't think Dishonored 2 outshines Dishonored 1, which isn't a bad thing. It just feels like more of the same. But it's also not like it's too much of a good thing, if that makes sense. Although I will say that the poor launch the game had on both PC and console left a very unpleasant taste in my mouth, and it definitely hindered my experience. Regardless, you can bet I'm going to be playing Dishonored 2 for a very long time. The Last Guardian. Wow. This game is incredible. I don't think I've ever played anything like The Last Guardian. It's just a roller coaster ride of emotions. This is probably one of the most underrated games of the year for me. It's something I think most critics just didn't really understand. And yeah, that's a pretty dumb thing to say for obvious reasons. But the reason I say it is because you really need to play The Last Guardian at your own pace. This isn't the sort of thing that you can rush through to get your review out before everyone else. Of course it'll frustrate you if you go in with that attitude and approach. This game is literally built to be played at a slow pace. When I call my dog, it doesn't respond immediately. Maybe it's just badly trained, but the point I'm trying to make is that Trico is one of the most convincing artificial intelligences I've seen in a game. This character never once broke its realistically inquisitive facade. If it didn't listen to me, it was observing something or tending to itself in some way. Sometimes it did things I needed to do to get past an obstacle without me even having to tell it what to do. The way Trico and the boy behave with and without one another looked and felt so real. There's so much personality in everything these two characters do. This is an incredible example of telling a story in a way only video games can, and I don't think I've ever felt a connection with characters in this manner before. Unlike games like Uncharted 4, The Last Guardian doesn't convey emotions or express ideas using storytelling methods seen in other media, like film. There's an excellent video by Mark Brown on Game Maker's Toolkit which talks about The Last Guardian and the language of video games, which I highly recommend you all check out. He's bound to do a better job than me of explaining what makes this game so special. It's very difficult for me to explain what The Last Guardian invoked in me using my limited vocabulary. And it's even harder for me to be at least a tad objective about it. As you may have noticed just in this video, I've too frequently used words like perfect and flawless to express my love for the games on this list. So yeah, The Last Guardian. Play this. There's really nothing else like it. Final Fantasy 15. Final Fantasy 15 was the biggest surprise of 2016 for me. I'm nearly immediately turned off by games with an anime or just general Japanese aesthetic. I don't think I've ever enjoyed a JRPG either. I don't even like Western RPGs for the most part. This game was released and I didn't care until I started watching some gameplay. I am a huge sucker for good animation in games, and so that was what first grabbed my attention. This initial spark resulted in a snowball effect of sorts. Something else which initially appealed to me was the manner in which the game seemed to mash different cultures together in a way I didn't quite understand, but nonetheless was compelled to investigate. So obviously I bought the game, and there were a few hours of me being uncertain as to whether or not I had made a good purchase. I wasn't used to how JRPGs worked, and I know this is perhaps a fairly watered down one, but I think that's a strength for me. After a while, I was simply hooked. It was like something just clicked in my brain and I didn't want to put the controller down. That's a cheesy thing to say, but it really is true in this case. I love the way this game feels and plays. While it can become rather chaotic at times with all kinds of particle effects and attack animations blasting away on screen in any given battle, it always feels responsive and exhilarating, and as far as I know, this is the first Final Fantasy to fully abandon turn-based gameplay. So this is quite a feat if you think about it. The open world is just so beautiful and full of stuff to do, and while many of the side quests aren't terribly interesting, I always felt rewarded whenever I did one. It's been a long time since I was addicted to leveling up a character. The last game that had this effect on me was, like, RuneScape. I'll be the first to admit that this might not be the best game on this list, but it is the one I've invested the most time in 2016, and the one I'm still playing on a consistent basis. There are a ton of things I find lackluster about it, like the fact that some parts of the game, its gameplay, and especially its story, don't make too much sense or mesh terribly well together. Even if you watch the short anime and movie beforehand, you're probably going to be left scratching your head at some points because things have a tendency to just exist or just happen for no real reason or explanation. Final Fantasy 15 can get bogged down with features and activities I don't really give a crap about, and which I feel don't enhance the experience for me in any meaningful way. But I can assure you that there's probably something in here for everyone. It might even be a jack of all trades, master of none scenario, but I don't really care. While I did grow to care for the pretty boy squad over time, I am also rather uncertain about how I feel about the character designs and their personality archetypes. That being said, there were a lot of genuinely touching and moving moments littered throughout this somewhat broken narrative. Square Enix knows this game isn't finished yet, and they're going to be adding to it. But what is here is somehow so compelling to me for reasons I can't really put my finger on. Maybe that's a cop-out, but sometimes it's nice for me to just accept that I enjoy something without even figuring out exactly why. I don't know, I think a lot of it has to do with how the game is presented, challenging even Uncharted 4 when it comes to its visuals and set pieces, and especially its performance. And this is an open world game, so that is even more impressive. The summons are a particularly high point, but it's definitely not just the visuals that make this game so compelling for me. That makes it sound so much more shallow than I think it is, and it might make me sound as shallow as I actually am. But regardless, Final Fantasy 15 is my game of the year simply because of how much of a surprise it was to me. Like stumbling over a gem that hadn't been entirely polished, but which is pretty damn sweet to play with. I don't know, forget the analogy. Anyway, those are my top 5 games of 2016. Purely subjective and arbitrary, sometimes not entirely justified, but whatever. It's my list. Before I go, I'd like to give an honorable mention to Titanfall 2, which would have been my number 6. I love Titanfall 2 as my go-to multiplayer game at the moment. The story was also shockingly good, but I do feel like it is a tad overrated. Some levels were really interesting, but overall it came across as a really good Call of Duty campaign. Following similar storytelling principles, I just don't find very interesting. I must commend the studio on its great business practices and for listening to its fans, but I do find it sad that free DLC is something that comes as such a surprise these days. That's just how it is, so good on you, Respawn. Alright everyone, that's a wrap. Have a great day.